Hey BookTube, welcome to my channel, Barter Hordes. My name is Robert. Happy Friday fiction. This week I read another one of the semifinalists for the 2022 BookTube Prize in Fiction, and that is The Island of Missing Trees by Elif Shafak. Now, Elif Shafak was the author of 10 minutes 38 seconds in This Strange World. Last year or 2 years ago, I forget which year it was, but it was a finalist for the BookTube Prize. So she's an author who has appealed to our judges twice now. And it was probably my favorite book of that year, of those 6 finalists, even though it didn't win the prize. And so I was really interested in reading this one. And then I read about the premise and I thought, well, maybe not. She has some experience with writing from unusual perspectives. In 10 minutes 38 seconds, she's writing from the perspective of a woman who has just been murdered. And the book is narrated across the 10 minutes 38 seconds. Her brain remains active before she completely dies. And so that's kind of an interesting perspective. This one goes a little bit different direction. That one of the main voices in the book is a fig tree that is initially inside a tavern in Cyprus, but a cutting of that tree has been taken to London and transplanted. And so it is one of the sources of many of the revelations in the book, which is a little bit weird. But as I got further and further into it, it kind of grew on me, no pun intended. This is a little bit of a hard book to talk about because it's got multiple timelines, which I often really like, and I liked it in this book. But when you talk about the different timelines, sometimes you give away too much in how they are related. So I'm going to try to be careful not to do that, because a lot of this book rests on revelations of things that we don't know, or things that we already know, and the dramatic irony is that the characters don't yet know. And so it's a really interesting blend of that. The first timeline takes place in 1974 on the island of Cyprus, right as the civil war between Turkish residents and Greek residents was boiling over and becoming actual warfare. Tensions had been high for a long time, but it's come to a head in 1974. And there is a tavern pretty much right on what becomes the dividing line between a partitioned Cyprus later on. And it's owned by a Greek and a Turkish owner, the two owners. But they also happen to be lovers, which is a complication in the story because neither society is particularly tolerant of gay relationships, especially a gay relationship between a Turk and a Greek. So they are a hot point in that society. But they become a haven for another kind of Romeo and Juliet story. The main character in the book, Costas, is a Greek, and he falls in love with a girl named Daphne, who is Turkish. And they realize very quickly that neither of their families is ever going to like this or agree to it or help them. And so they kind of seek out a haven in this tavern, the Happy Fig. And the fig tree that I mentioned before is growing up in the middle of the tavern. It's actually inside the building with an opening in the roof cut out. And they go there when they want to see each other and try to stay away from prying eyes from the families. When the fighting starts, though, in 1974, Costas's family, because some of his brothers have already either been killed or are missing, they send him to London to keep him out of the fray. And he doesn't want to go, of course, because he wants to be with Daphne. And he doesn't even get a chance to tell her goodbye in person. They just send him to London to be with an uncle. And they said, it's only for a couple weeks, don't worry. And of course, once he's in London and the fighting breaks out in Cyprus, they don't let him go back to Cyprus. And so he's stuck in London for years and years and years. So that's the first timeline. You get two kind of Romeo and Juliet stories, both the tavern owners and the main character Costas and Daphne. The second timeline that we learn about is actually the third timeline, which is in the late 2010s in London. Costas's daughter Ada is a young teenager. I think she's a teenager. If not, she's 12, something like that. And she is grieving. Her mother has died. Her mother, of course, is Daphne. And that's not a spoiler. We learn that right away. So somehow Costas and Daphne do end up together, but you don't know how yet. And Daphne has died, though, and Ada and Costas are not dealing with the grief very well. And Ada is having problems at school. She doesn't get along with other students. They pick on her. Costas has kind of become solitary. He was always kind of solitary, but he studies trees. That's his profession. And he has kind of thrown himself into his work, and he hasn't really been there for his daughter. And so they're kind of in a mess. And eventually, Daphne's sister, whom Ada has never met, has never even heard from, comes for a visit in London. And of course, it's very tense. Ada resents the other two families that have never come to visit them, have never come to see them in London. And when Miriam shows up, there's some tension there, and it's kind of a hard transition period. Miriam tries to explain some things to Daphne that Daphne could never have known, and vice versa. But then we find out about the third timeline, which is actually the second in sequence. And that is 25 years after Costas leaves Cyprus, so roughly 2000. He goes back to find Daphne and also to revisit Cyprus, which he has not revisited since he left in 1974. And so you get the story of how they do end up together. But you also get the story of how he goes to the tavern, which is now a ruin in kind of the demilitarized zone, is a ruin, and they go in to see the inside and the fig tree. He wants to visit the tree, and it's very sick and is dying. It's been infested with parasites and so on. So he tries to do what he can to save the tree, but he takes a cutting of the tree to take back to London to transplant, to hope to keep that part of the tree alive. That's all I'm going to tell you. Everything else is telling you too much. I probably have already said too much, but it's a really fascinating story of what that kind of civil war does generationally, even to people who have never stepped foot in Cyprus, like Ada. It's also a story about how a community which had been a real community. The Greeks and Turks were always different, but they always got along and they always did things together, suddenly turned against each other when the Civil War breaks out, as civil wars often do, as if you want to talk about Rwanda, something like that. And then it's also about these family stories and the secrets that are kept, the secrets that finally do come out, the connections that are made, all the threads that are tied together in these families. To me, this was a really touching story about family, about the tragedy of loss, about mourning, about grief, about what war does to societies. All these different topics come together in kind of an unusual format because you've got a talking tree as one of the characters, and a tree that tells you early on that it's in love with Costas, which is really weird when you first read it, but you actually understand it as you go through the book. So overall, I'm not sure if this is my favorite book of the ones I've read recently, but it is a favorite book. I really did enjoy this. I think I gave it 4 stars on Goodreads because there's no half stars. I probably would have gone the half star between 4 and 5 stars on Goodreads. I really enjoy the way Shafak thinks, the way she ties things together, the way she weaves these generational stories together. I think she's just a genius at that kind of a story. And so this one really did stick with me. If you've read it, drop me a comment below. Let me know what you thought of it, whether you liked it as much as I did or more or less. I've seen some negative reviews. The whole talking tree thing put a lot of people off. But for me, it was a really successful book. I really enjoy her writing. I've got a bunch of her her back catalog to read through someday, but I just haven't made time to do that yet. I hope you're reading something fun. Hope you've had a great week, and I will talk to you again hopefully next Friday when I finish another one. A couple of the ones that I'm planning to read are a little bit longer than usual, so they may take me more than 1 week to finish, but we'll see. I'll either be back next Friday or shortly after that. Talk to you all soon. Bye, everybody.